Good morning. This is Stuart Battle with the LaRouche organization. It's August 3rd, 2023, and this is your daily video update. So there's obviously been a lot of talk in the U.S. about election politics, and I just want to address some of it because it's undoubtedly being discussed everywhere. Whether this is the ongoing drama playing out with Joe and Hunter Biden, the massive scale of corruption which is opening up and trying to be covered up by the usual suspects, whether it's Joe Biden wandering off the screen at MSNBC. Now you've got Trump having received his 76th count of indictment the other day, all for erroneous and ridiculous reasons, as are obvious. This stuff is everywhere. It's clearly a dominant kind of a soap opera drama. Of course, now the talk is that both Biden and Trump are relatively tied, which the media are saying, well, how is that possible, given the fact that Trump, the opposition candidate, as you know, he's about to go to prison and he's still doing nearly better than the incumbent. So anyways, I think it's worth just making the point that sure, these are goings on, but don't let yourself get bogged down in it. Don't let your head get dragged through the drama of the day. It's useful to remember that the two leading opposition candidates, Trump and RFK Jr., have been, relatively outspoken against the fact that we're on the verge of a nuclear war. And much of the rest of the debate is really not so important, even if it's not discussed every day. This was actually brought up by Trump himself in a Newsweek editorial the other day, where he mentioned the fact that the whole Russiagate scandal over the recent years largely set the stage for the danger of Russophobia and getting us to want to hate Russia, as is now so dangerously getting us into World War III. So, you've got this kind of stuff going on. There's also major hotspots taking place now, not necessarily around Ukraine, but around Poland. And there's been increasing talk over the recent days that there are people in Poland, essentially, who are bringing up the fact that we may have to be prepared to have a war against the Russians and also the Belarusians in Poland, in Eastern Europe. And it's generally being seen as the Russians as potentially the next theater in a conflict, as the Ukrainian counteroffensive has continued to fail. So we'll see how this plays out. It's useful to keep it in mind. Poland has many deep issues in terms of their seeing that Western Ukraine was previously Polish territory, so it's already kind of a murky subject that we should just be aware of. And I think, however you think about it, what former UN weapon inspector Scott Ritter said the other day, which is that essentially the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists have it all wrong when they say that we're 90 seconds to midnight, and they list their various things. They list the discussion about war and NATO-Russia conflict over Ukraine. He says they've got it all wrong. We're actually 0.001 seconds to midnight. And only when you can recognize that are you in the real world. And he is absolutely right, because all it takes is one little mistake, one little slip-up, before the already non-existent relationship between the U.S. and NATO and Russia goes into end phase. So that's the reality, as listeners of this show will already know. However, what I think is important to talk about, and we've covered some of this over the recent days, but the reality is actually even far bigger than that, and it really is a world-changing, a historic-changing moment that we're living in, of which the danger of war with other major superpowers is merely a reflection. But the well, to as it was said by Vladimir Lenin at one point many years ago, there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And I think that's exactly where we are today. So again, don't get stuck in the undoubtedly swirl and dramas of the day, but realize we're actually in a major centuries wide. I'd say it's not even just where decades happen. These are weeks where centuries happen. So what am I talking about? Helga LaRouche brought this up somewhat in her webcast yesterday, looking back at what just occurred over the last week, which was the summit in Russia, featuring virtually every African government, including many heads of state, where you had just a completely transformed discussion process on the highest level, on the level of what we value between our two nations, between Russia and African nations. As was said at the end by the president of South Africa when he was meeting with Putin privately, he said, what we appreciate with Russia is that you guys see and respect African sovereignty and respect our role in the world for what it is, as opposed to what was referenced repeatedly, which is this neo-colonial nature of the current global system, the current Western rules-based order. And this was discussed thoroughly at the final declaration of the 3-day summit. They explicitly said, we want a new financial architecture, we want an era free of colonial underpinnings, and we want the right to develop. We want the right to development for every nation, which emphatically is our right as African countries to do so. And so this was really the theme. And as we've spoken of before, it reflects exactly this change in the world, not only in the spirit of which these nations are acting, but the fact that you've got countries like Russia, like China, and others who are positioning themselves to a new paradigm of what must underpin mankind in the future, which I think is absolutely the way to think about this, and it's absolutely the way that Lyndon LaRouche and the LaRouche movement have discussed it, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. So what Helga had mentioned, though, in her webcast yesterday was this very interesting subject that you really have to think on what we're living through, which is, Russia previously tried to orient towards Europe, towards the West, when the Soviet Union collapsed. It was generally discussed throughout the United States and Europe that this was just the way the world was going to be. There was this famous book by Francis Fukuyama called The End of History, which he published after the fall of the Soviet Union, which essentially said that liberal democracy is now the only and last form of government because it's the best, and it's every nation will eventually move towards this. So this is the so-called end of history. This was the unelected and unvoted so-called rules-based order that just asserted this is what the way it is and always will be. The so-called American century, and what was presumed to be the shape of the world, at least by the people who are jerks and pricks and liars. So this is what's now failing. And, you know, just to give another reminder and kind of a reflection on this, just several months back was the U.S.-Africa Summit held in Washington, D.C. More recently, maybe a month or two ago, was the Paris Summit held by the President of France, at which many of African heads of state attended. During these two summits, what happened? That the Western leaders only received lectures from African presidents and prime ministers. They said, "How dare you continue to try to boss us around? We're not going to put up with this anymore." So there was a bunch of finger pointing and lecturing and chastising, which is totally deserved from African heads of state. This was not the case with Vladimir Putin. This was not the case at the Russia-Africa Summit. So this is what kind of change is happening. This is the multiple centuries transformation of the world that is taking place now. And it, of course, is why there is such a massive danger of war breaking out as a civilizational change takes place. And it's up to us, it's up to the well-placed and competent factions within Western governments, especially the United States, not just governments, but societies, the people, to act on this, to act in this context and at this level. Helga said herself that if you look at it from the internal situation alone, within the United States, within a country like Germany where she is, then it seems hopeless. But if you look at it from this actual historical transformation, then the drama of the day goes away, the pettiness of the day, the stupidity. You can actually see a pathway if leadership is taken up. So of course that's what we're calling on people to do. That's what this weekend, the anniversary of the dropping of the bomb at Hiroshima, will be commemorating the Humanity for Peace rallies taking place around the world, which we definitely encourage you to mobilize for and show up this Sunday. But keep this in mind of the real change which is underway, and why any real peace movement must take into consideration the revolution currently happening in the world and emphatically coming from the global south, and why this is the substance of true peace in the world. So I just want to end with a quote, kind of an extended quote from Mr. LaRouche, that was given at a seminar in Washington, D.C. to a number of government representatives, ambassadors, and others in June of 1997, where he spoke on this subject. And I think will give you a sense of the importance of these ideas and of thinking beyond the immediate events unfolding in front of us today for solving these very real problems. So let me read to you some of what he said. He said, in respect to Africa, "This is not a story on a television screen. This is not a story in a book or a play on a stage. This is reality. This is not about Africans. This is about you. You're in the same play. You're in the same world. The images that are hurting the Africans, they're already hurting most of you. Whether you're in the United States or some other country, the same evil that is killing Africans is killing us, or will kill us soon." And he goes on to talk about whether it's the breakdown of cities and infrastructure, whether it's the breakdown in health, the collapse in living standards, the breakdown in education and moral standing, the economic destruction and increased rates of poverty, what have you. It's the same process that's happening in the United States and Western countries as is happening in Africa, even though it was happening much earlier. So he says, continuing, we're in a decaying civilization. It's degenerating from the top to the bottom. And as a result of that degeneracy, the kind of degeneracy we would not have tolerated while Kennedy was still alive, a great genocide is now ongoing in Africa. And the American population so far has been indifferent to the fact of this genocide. So therefore, when you say something is happening in Africa, a genocide in Africa, we're not simply talking about something on the African stage. We're not simply saying, have empathy for the suffering people of some foreign country, as if they're on some foreign planet. What we're seeing is the symptom in Africa of the moral self-destruction of an entire civilization. So what do? LaRouche says, use this horror, use the recognition that we let it get this bad as a lesson, and make a commitment to address this moral decay within ourselves and within the world. So he says, the only hope we have is to look at this horror and turn this horror of Africa, the horrors which are similarly represented in other places, and turn that into a lesson quickly and say, this is what we are seeing. We are seeing a great civilization which is destroying itself because it has denied the right of human beings in Africa and elsewhere, the right to be treated as persons created in the image of God. With that determination, and letting Africa and the horror of Africa be a commitment, saying we are going to fix this. We recognize this cannot be fixed unless we are willing to change within ourselves and our institutions. But we are going to fix it, and we will not quit until it's fixed. So, with that, I think those are useful ideas to keep in mind. Join us this weekend, help us mobilize into it, and let's accomplish a lot of good. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.